Privet and greetings from Budapest in Hungary, where I have relocated temporarily because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It is day 49 when I'm filming this for reference. And in today's video, I am going to go into a reaction video which is the most requested actually in the last few weeks of the war. That is Patrick Lancaster. He is an American YouTuber embedded with the Donetsk People's Republic's militia, and he has been covering the war and going to Mariupol, which, on day 49 looks absolutely horrific. The whole situation in the city, and I actually was in Mariupol, it must be about 5 or 6 months ago, and I filmed there. I walked through the center, went down to the seaside, full of smiling people, young families out pushing their prams through the central parks. A bit like here, I'm in the center of Budapest. I'm here by the, I'm up here at the Buda Castle area, and the scenes were not so different to here. So let me go into the video and explain a few things, what I think of his coverage, and in fact, what I think is the real reason you should watch him. That is how he unwittingly exposes war crimes, but in fact it's the war crimes committed by the side that he is embedded with. And lastly, why it's very, very hard to justify that he is in fact a journalist there and not a combatant. So let's get into the video. Поехали.
SAR Experience.
So Patrick Lancaster, who is he and what is he doing exactly in Donbass? Now, I look back at his channel from the very beginning. It seems he started around 2014 with the beginning of this war between Ukraine and Russia, with the Russian annexation of Crimea and then the war starting in Donbass. He seems in his first videos to have come to Ukraine with quite an open mind, because he interviewed kind of both sides in the conflict. He even interviewed people who consider Russian dissidents. But then very quickly, the nature of his content changed, and he seems to have been, I guess, radicalized by being in Ukraine. And soon afterwards, he starts to appear embedded in the Donetsk People's Republic's militia. And, I saw another video where he's kissing his wife and children goodbye with the start of this current invasion of Ukraine, obviously February 24th, 2022, that started. So it seems in the meantime, I would guess that he's gotten married and had children, been living in Donetsk. And, when you're embedded in an army for a long number of years, because most of his content has been from Donbass, not exclusively, but vast majority of it, then you're definitely not an independent journalist at that stage. Now, I looked at his self-description as an independent journalist, and I actually think what he means is that he's not financed by any side. He's not actually independent, because obviously if you're going to be embedded in an army for a large part of 8 years, they are not going to allow you being embedded unless you're of value to them, i.e. propaganda value. So it's not possible. It's not like he is working for a news agency and he's embedded for 2 days and then he goes to another conflict and he's embedded for another 2 days, where you could say maybe there's a chance of objectivity. In Patrick's case, he's clearly part of their military at this stage. Now, he is saying that he's a journalist, as a press officer. I'll go into that a little bit late in the video, why he compromises that and actually makes himself a combatant, but clearly he is filming from one point of view. So Patrick Lancaster's coverage since this war has begun is kind of twofold. He is either in the areas that have just been conquered by the Russian forces, a part of which he's embedded with, or he goes back to Donetsk and the areas that they held before, and he reports on alleged Ukrainian attacks, so shelling of primarily some civilian area, and he interviews the locals in both, locals in inverted commas. So when he's in the Donetsk People's Republic side, inevitably he's at a building that has been shelled. They're doing an investigation. There's allegations of cluster munition been used, which is illegal under international law in a civilian area. And he interviews the locals and they say, oh, it was the Ukrainians definitely who shelled here. And there are other alleged attacks, like on civilians, that he goes to, some of those I've read online, a lot of debunking stories, but it's very hard for me to tell what's true and what's not true because I'm not an expert in that. But it seems that inevitably when he reports from the Donetsk People's Republic, the Ukrainians have done something terrible. Then when he's in the newly conquered part of Donbass with the Russian forces, there is absolute carnage everywhere. Remember, he is part of effectively an imperialistic army. You can go back and watch President Putin's declaration of war speech where basically he said Ukraine's not a real country, its borders are legitimate, and we're going to denazify it, i.e. we're going to just take it and crush it. And you see the absolute hellish scene that he is walking into, and it is his army, the army that he's embedded with, that has done this. But Patrick somehow managed to find locals who he claims have just been liberated, who are willing to blame the Ukrainians for everything, right? So inevitably it means that instead of the Russians having shelled and destroyed 90%, 80% of the buildings, say Mariupol and also in other towns in Donbass on the way down, he finds a local who's willing to say, no, it was the Ukrainians who blew up everything before they left. And the Ukrainians kept us as human shields, wouldn't let us out. And it was the Ukrainians who did X, Y, and Z. So, you got two. This might have been a little bit more plausible earlier on in the conflict when you had the war in Donbass starting, because then you had some local support of sorts for the Donetsk People's Republic. How much is a question of speculation. And then you had the Ukrainian forces, once the separatists controlled certain areas, coming back to try and retake that. So you have civilians in the way, who knows which side they support. But in this case, you have a very clear invading army that is going into a previously peaceful area, because I was there. And just like I said, it could be just as peaceful as you see the scene behind me, and absolutely calling hellish carnage that Europe has not seen since World War II. We've already gone past, in my opinion, the barbarity of the Balkans Wars, which went on for 3 years in the early 90s in Europe, but they managed to exceed it. So the whole idea that it's self-inflicted somehow is not very plausible. And what he shows with these interviews is very often contradicted by either Putin's statements himself. So Putin even said that Mariupol, we'll stop shelling Mariupol if they just surrender. But in Patrick's coverage, the locals are always saying it's the Ukrainian shelling. It doesn't make any sense.
Мариуполь, Бруня говорит, я тут с обоих сторон, но то, что сколько было провокаций, стреляли из жилых, вызывали на себя ответку, прямо у нас вот бомбили, здесь разбомблены это самое, есть минометы, вызывали на себя огонь, это было.
То есть по поводу военных преступлений, нарушений прав человека, какие-то свидетельства есть у вас?
Я, честно говоря, ко мне такого не предъявляли, но то, что вот это вот вызывать на себя огонь в жилом секторе, это как-то, считаю, неправильно. Слухов очень много, просто пересказывать не хочу. Сейчас говорят, что там на ЖД вокзале прикрывается и все, но это пусть расскажут те ребята, которые там сидят, которые выйдут оттуда.
Понятно. По поводу гуманитарных коридоров. С самого начала конфликта Россия предоставляла возможность покинуть город. Что вы об этом
Информации никакой. Буквально люди выбирали сами, собирались колонны. Я знаю четко, вот у меня родственники все выезжали. Самоорганизации на машинах. Узнавали, где можно пройти, как сталкер, вот как мы сейчас там ходим, где какие парашюты. Сейчас только что завозил сюда гуманитарку на гавань с Мусой и так далее. То есть ДНР мы завозили на гавань. То есть никто не знает, как не проехать, ничего. Я просто их завез сюда, людям раздали хлеб и все остальное.
And then, because I watch pro-Russian propaganda for part of the day, they have so many videos where they're showing off firing indiscriminately into buildings where there's no military need to do so, no soldiers, nothing. So it just doesn't add up that that's the only people that he's willing to find. And even Scott Ritter, who is I'm not sure, former RT, Russia Today contributor, and definitely on the side of the Russians in this war, expressed great skepticism about the reliability of his coverage. He said, I hope that he's not just getting his local handlers to organize, or his local handlers are just organizing, that he only films these people about to come up the road who are going to repeat some pro-Russian talking points.
First of all, it's invaluable journalism that he's doing.
Yeah.
But again, we're viewing it from long distance.
Right.
We don't know if this was a setup. We don't know if his Russian handler said, "Hey, we're going to have some people coming by here. You go ahead and talk to them." Now, I've watched enough of his broadcasts. He proclaims to be an independent journalist who does his own reporting, and I hope that's true. And I hope that what we just saw there was as fresh as it looked. But
Yeah.
you don't know.
So basically, I find his coverage completely unreliable, but he's put it at arm's length because he does his interviews and he can say, "Oh, it's not me, it's just all these people I found who are able to give this very implausible version of events about what's going on in Donbass." Now, I'm not saying he should be cancelled or something because I don't find him very credible. I don't think he should be calling himself a journalist, for sure. And, you know, he's a YouTuber and he wants to give, you know, one side of the story. Propaganda is everywhere in war, and there's the fog of war on top of it. So, and obviously Ukraine has its own propaganda departments, Russia has its propaganda departments, the US and Britain have propaganda departments, so it's not a big surprise. But to watch it and think that it is somehow an accurate portrayal is going on, in the sense that he tries to represent it with these interviews, not very convincing to me. And I actually look down often in the comments below his videos, and so many of the comments are in Russian, and they seem to be, I mean, it's always hard to tell if there could be a bot farm, I know, but they seem genuine, and it seems like a lot of people in Russia watch his stuff because it's the American voice telling them that all this carnage, destruction, unprovoked war, invasion, destroying a city of 500,000 people, for example, with Mariupol, reducing almost to rubble, that it's the Ukrainians' fault. And that's where propaganda is really important in the war. It might even be that he convinces too many people in the international audience, but he's able to allow people in Russia feel like, oh, there's an objective source, the guy's American. Well, he's not really objective. So what I did is actually, out of curiosity, I thought, well, this war, this invasion, is on many levels analogous to, say, the Nazi-Soviet invasion of Poland in 1939. So it'd be interesting to just put into YouTube, you know, Nazi or German propaganda video, invasion of Poland. And like the second result came up, matched incredibly with the talking points that Russia uses in this war, and that Patrick's coverage supplement, shall we say. So I'll put a link to that video down below. It's really interesting to watch it in hindsight because, you know, there's things about, well, in Danzig and other parts of Poland, Germans or German speakers are being oppressed by those terrible Poles. The Poles then go and they attack the Germans. You know, it's obviously a false flag operation. It's called Gladwitz instance. It's well documented. What do we see before this war? A lot of rhetoric about how the people of Donbass are oppressed. They're really Russian. They're Russian speakers, and those Ukrainians are suppressing them. Oh, look, they're getting attacked by those nasty Ukrainians. Then you have an invasion, absolute heinous destruction in Poland. And then at the end, you know, the Germans are liberated and they're greeting the German soldiers with tea and biscuits. They're pulling down those awful, oppressive Polish signs everywhere. And yeah, the good guys have won, if you watch that video, which is pretty similar to what you can see on the Russian side. You know, our guys only do good. In fact, the Russians say, so I even watched one of the Kremlin's, I think she's press secretary, she's not press secretary, it's Peskov. Anyways, Maria Zakharova, say today that, you know, Russia does not target civilians. Russia is only targeting military infrastructure. The whole talking point is Russia cannot commit war crimes because they don't prosecute. As far as I know, they don't prosecute anyone for war crimes in any of the other theaters have been. Like, basically, look at the level of destruction in Chechnya. Tell me that there weren't war crimes going on. They didn't target civilian areas. They razed the city. Aleppo and Syria razed the city. Now we see them again doing the same and just complete denial of what is going on. It's not credible. And looking at that German film, we wouldn't call the guy who made it or the woman who made it, today we wouldn't say they were a journalist or a documentary maker. We'd say they were a German propagandist. We'd probably say they're a Nazi propagandist, and they made a propaganda film to justify the unprovoked invasion of Poland in 1939. Now, we know today that obviously there was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and the secret protocols, and it actually already agreed, the two of them, to divide it between them. And all this was just propaganda to justify it internationally and also to the German people why they were suddenly invading Poland. Well, you should look at Patrick Lancaster's work in the field in the same way. He's embedded there, and it is the same kind of message. And, you know, obviously we're now almost 90 years later, and the means by which we can do this propaganda are very different, and he has taken this kind of more raw in the field approach to it. But basically that's what I think of his coverage. Now, there are good reasons. I'm not saying don't watch his stuff, because there are very good reasons to watch his stuff, and they are basically twofold. One, you can see the absolute depravity of what the army that he is embedded with are doing in Ukraine. Now, he's trying to blame the Ukrainians through his coverage for causing all this destruction, but it's pretty clear what's going on. You can see, if you put a black and white filter over his footage of the, you know, people fleeing, who are traumatized, who have been stuck in a city. It's on day 49 now of this siege of Mariupol, and the city is still not fully under Russian control. The city has 500,000 inhabitants, more or less. The hundreds of thousands of people have been trying to get out. They've lost everything. Like 80 to 90% of the buildings are partially or completely destroyed in the city. Where I used to go and have coffee, go to restaurants, have a cocktail in the evening, completely destroyed. I've seen those cities. The main theater in the center, completely destroyed. Russia denies that it bombed it. Of course, the usual modus operandi must be the Ukrainians, even though they're the ones attacking the city, the Russians. And you just see the level of destruction. Put a black and white filter on that. It looks like something out of World War II. It's that level of destruction. And, you know, targeting those civilian areas and just the horrendous suffering that's gone on, he is exposing just the brutality of the army that he is embedded in and which he's a part of. And at times he actually looks like he realizes just how horrific everything is around him. And I'm not sure if he realized his own, not direct role, obviously he's not on camera cheering on someone getting killed or something like that, or actively taking part in killing people from what's on camera, but he is playing a role within that army. And that's what they've done to Mariupol. And at the same time, they're perversely claiming that they're liberating the oppressed Russian-speaking people of Donbass, while they absolutely razed the city like a Mongol horde, trying to wreck everything, right? So it's basically unwittingly documenting the level of depravity and destruction committed by the Russian forces. And in the end, no doubt when this is investigated and prosecuted, that will be useful for, you know, accusations of war crimes, along with a lot of other stuff that the Russian side just put in their Telegram channels. There's many instances where they inadvertently film themselves committing war crimes. So that is another example of that. And to understand just how horrific this war is, that is a reason to actually look. And obviously it's very dramatic because he's embedded in a military that's there. So another really bizarre thing that I noticed about Patrick and the way he was dressed is that he was wearing these ribbons that would identify him as being part of the Russian military, because both sides, to avoid friendly fire incidents where they get shot by their own side, they're wearing ribbons to indicate which side, and there are several colors depending which side they're on. I think the Russians are using white and red, and then Ukrainians are wearing blue and yellow. Obviously the Ukrainian flag is blue and yellow, so that makes sense. The Russian flag has red in it. I guess they also have blue, so they don't want to do that because that'd be ambiguous. And then they also have white, so that might be it. I'm not really sure the reason. And he was wearing military fatigues. And if you look at the other, well, the journalist in this conflict, they're not wearing ribbons and they're not wearing camouflage. They're wearing very distinct press outfits with body armor that say press, and they have a special helmet. And normally it's dark blue color, and that allows them to be identifiable as a journalist, as press, whether they're embedded or not in the military. And that's to avoid being targeted by either militaries in the conflict. Obviously, journalists are not combatants. They are, it's a war crime to target them and to obviously kill them or injure them. So, and as a journalist, you definitely want to make sure that people see that you're a journalist and not kill you in a conflict zone, because obviously that includes even if you're embedded. Actually, it's kind of interesting to read under Geneva Conventions and other parts of international law, the status of being embedded is a bit different, because then you could be also entitled to prisoner of war status if you are taken by one side in the conflict. But in this case, he is wearing clothes that do not identify him as a journalist. He does have press written across here, but it must be hard to see it because the rest of them makes him look like a soldier, and a soldier from the Russian side in the conflict. So I found this very odd, and saying, well, why is he dressed as a soldier if he's saying he's a journalist? But then he gives this explanation that we can now listen to.
Why do I have a camouflage cover on my helmet now? That's because I've been advised by the local militia and Russian army that if I wear the black helmet, there's a chance I could be misidentified as a Ukrainian serviceman and shot. As well, that's why I am wearing this white patch on my arm and my leg. This is because this is a form of IFF, or identify friend or foe. And without this, and anyone that looks like they could be military could be misidentified as Ukrainian. And that's not something you want to be identified as a Ukrainian soldier in the DPR and Russian territory. That could lead to a lot of problems. And of course, I also have a press insignia.
So, wow, I am just shocked. He is saying that he does not want to dress as a journalist because the Russian side will think that he is a Ukrainian soldier. Now that is completely implausible for two reasons. One, he doesn't look like a Ukrainian soldier if he's in press gear. He looks like a journalist in press gear. And the other journalists that I have seen in the conflict who have been embedded with the Ukrainian military and the Russian military, who are international journalists, like not Ukrainian or Russian, and even Russian journalists, they are wearing this standard press gear that identifies them as journalists. And they are also embedded in Mariupol. Now, they're not embedded for a long period of time. They usually go for a day, still the international journalists. But they're with the same side of the conflict in the same city. And they're not worried about being shot, or that's not the advice they're given. It seems like he is implicitly saying that the Donetsk People's Republic militia will presume anyone who's dressed as a journalist is a Ukrainian soldier. That means that they consider them a combatant, and the logical deduction is that they are targeting those people, and that is clearly a war crime. So there he is, inadvertently, with his bizarre attempted justification why he is dressed as a combatant, telling us that the part of the army that he is embedded with are committing war crimes. And around the same time when he made that video, there were two people who we can say are journalists. One was documentary maker in Ukraine, who were dressed in that press gear, who were shot dead, who were killed by the Russian side. So, yeah, it's just mad for me that he's saying this. And think about it. He is saying, or the advice that he's taken and that he's following, is that he is more in danger by being in a press uniform, being shot by the Russian side or being killed by the Russian side, than he is dressed as a combatant and being killed by the Ukrainian side. So, yeah, I was absolutely blown away by that. It's basically a mission of war crimes from by the side that he's embedded with, and he keeps defending with his coverage and claiming, oh, they don't commit war crimes, it's always the Ukrainians. And the fact that he now identifies himself by his uniform, his outfit, as a combatant, well, does he then count as a journalist or press in this conflict anymore? Because he has a little press thing there, but I mean, if you're dressed with the camouflage and a ribbon indicating you've been a combatant from the Russian side, then a Ukrainian soldier who sees that in Mariupol is going to shoot at him, I'm guessing. And since he can't identify that he's actually press properly because he's dressed as a combatant, then that wouldn't be, in my opinion, just very a priori looking at it, a war crime. So yeah, he's made himself a legitimate target to be shot at by the Ukrainian side for sure by dressing as a combatant. So that brings down to my conclusion about Patrick Lancaster, is that his claim to be an independent journalist carries absolutely no water because, number one, he is maybe independently funded, maybe not in that sense. Maybe he's just making money from YouTube and the AdSense, but he's not an independent in the sense of independent on the conflict. He's clearly embedded with one side and he's part of their military. And I would just refer to him as a propagandist. It is what it is. Not saying that there aren't propagandists in all sides of the war and that he should be cancelled, as I said. No, I mean, you just have to understand when you're watching him what he is. And he's definitely not a journalist because he is dressed as a combatant in the war. Yeah, I don't wish him any ill will about what might happen in the rest of the conflict, but definitely he is not very convincing in his whole testimony, and on top of it, I just don't find his coverage very reliable. But as I said, he does manage to show us the absolute barbarity of this war, and he indicates to us the level of the war crimes being committed by, paradoxically, the side that he's actually embedded with. That is all I have to say about Patrick Lancaster. You're free to go and look at his videos and make up your own mind about what you think, and definitely leave me a comment down below about how you find his coverage, whether you think it's reliable, whether you think he's really a journalist, whether you think he should be allowed monetize it because he is embedded with a military that is part of the conflict, whether that's legitimate or not. Let me know all that stuff down below. And yeah, it's just really, really sad and despicable to see those scenes in Mariupol. I'll play some footage as well that I shot in Mariupol because I didn't make a vlog when I was there because I wanted to go back and actually spend more time in the city and make a proper vlog, and I shot a lot of preliminary footage for it. And I remember talking with my video editor at the time and said, you know, the seasons has kind of changed, should I wait a bit longer? But then I'm concerned that there's going to be a war and that we'll never get to go back to Mariupol again. And unfortunately, we will never go back to the same Mariupol. That is for sure when you look at just the level of destruction of the city. And this is the footage that's coming from the Russian side, showing the level of carnage that they've caused in the city. And it's just very tough to look at and imagine. Like, as I said at the beginning of this video, you know, here I'm very peaceful, there's no one behind me right now, but, you know, I was watching lots of families with prams walking around on this beautiful day, enjoying a nice peaceful city, and that is what I saw in Mariupol on a Sunday when I went there. People pushing prams, locals, you know, the level of Russian speakers in the city, it's probably over 90%, and now they are subjected to this horrendous barbarism by people who claim they're liberating the Russian speakers. So my heart goes out to the people of Mariupol, and I fear that in the coming weeks and months we're going to fully get to see and comprehend the absolute despicable acts that have been committed against them. So on that very poignant and sad note, Slava Ukraini, and I will see you in the next video.
SAR Experience.